Manager for Infrastructure of Development at CAF, where we oversee $13 billion in our portfolio. It's an honor for me to do the opening remarks of this session, Transports and Jobs. This is key to the central mission of CAF, which again is improving quality of living of people and increasing productivity in Latin America. Transport for us at CAF is just mobility. We see this more of a development strategy, that it provides access to opportunities, reduces informality, and more importantly, increases productivity. The conversation we're going to be having today directly touches what we've been promoting at CAF in the last couple of years, and we have pledged institutionally to increase the volume of financing up to $18 billion for the next year. We have pledged that in the UN Decade of Sustainable Transportation. And what we're going to be seeing in the conversation is to try to answer the key question, how we design better transport policy and how we can finance it better, but taking into consideration what is real relevant, to develop metrics that can show that accessibility is key. It's a key result of improving transport policy, and more importantly, how we develop transportation policy that can improve living conditions while enabling more jobs. What we're hoping to have this session will deliver. The first part is evidence. Professor Pereira will synthesize cutting research on how accessibility affects employment and probabilities, wage, hours work, and informality, particularly for vulnerable population like women, migrants, and young people. We will be having the subnational experience. We have here on our panel, Quito, Bogota, and Neuquén, and they will be talking not only what has worked, but more importantly, what hasn't worked. Again, how transport can provide access and opportunity. And finally, we will have from the World Bank the perspective of policy and fiscal perspective. And here the key question is, how can we develop better transport policies, not only that will prioritize CapEx, but again, what are those metrics that matter? The three takeaways we're hoping we all have at the end of the session is, again, the bigger employment impact often comes from just enabled and not just jobs created. Accessibility determines whether workers can reach better, safer, and more formal jobs. Metrics matters. If we want to answer the question I mentioned before, we need to develop better metrics. Again, that takes into consideration gender perspective, informality, and again, all the productivities questions again. And for us, the third takeaway that we want to emphasize is that one step towards accomplishing this agenda is to increase the volume and, most importantly, the quality of investment. It is not so much how much we invest, but how well we do it. And this is aligned to CAF long-term commitment, again, of our $18 billion and the UN Decade Sustainable Transport offer a clear roadmap. Having said this, thank you for joining us and your commitment to the transport agenda. And I will introduce a very interesting conversation between Professor Turner from Brown University and Stefan Stroh, Chief Economist from LAC, from the World Bank. They will dive into the literature that links land use, transportation, illustrating the prioritization challenge with some African and Asian case studies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Angel. So I'm Stefan Stroh, actually Chief Economist for Infrastructure.
Sorry.
Not yet for LAC, but...
I promoted you. I'm sorry about that. I hope that's it. Come back to you. I'm going to back.
Just to see if I'm paying attention, right? Okay, so it's my pleasure to lead this conversation here with Matt Turner. So let me briefly tell you about Matt. So Matt is actually one of the best-known researcher in the area of transport and urban economics, and I think it's a real honor to have him here today. He's worked extensively on land use, transportation, public transit, the growth of cities, and many other things. For those who know about publication economics, he actually published in all 5 of the top 5 journals in the profession, which is quite a feat. And he is currently a professor at Brown University, where he also got his PhD. to start with. I'm going to jump right in. We had many conversations to prepare for this, but obviously, you summarize what the topic of this year and of this session is. So if you think about powering jobs and growth, given your extensive work on transportation and urban, and I should warn you that we might have ideas and views that are not necessarily aligned with all our talking points. So buckle up for the conversation. What is, from your point of view, what should be the main motivation for investing in transport? Yeah.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to talk here and for the generous introduction. So what should be the main motivation for investing in transportation infrastructure? If it was me and I was in charge of building things, I would want to build things that people wanted to use and that they could afford, right? And so that sounds pretty straightforward, but I think it's actually a high hurdle, right? And so let me illustrate that with an example. So I once, on a seminar visit, visited the mayor's office in Memphis, and they were planning a light rail network, right? And I did the following calculation. Which was I took their estimates of how much it was going to cost, and I imagined that they just paid that with bonds that they would never repay. They issued bonds they would never repay, just pay the interest. All right, and so that's the capital cost of this project before they turned the lights on, before they bought rolling stock, before they hired the drivers, before they managed depreciation, right? And I divided that by the projected number of riders every year. All right. So anybody want to guess the number that I got per rider? It was $4 or $5 a rider. Okay. So just pure capital cost was $4 or $5 a rider. Right. And so then on top of that, I suppose that it cost about as much to run a light rail as it does to run buses in Rhode Island, variable costs. And that was another $4 or $5, which meant that the cost to run this thing was $10. All right. Now, it turns out that this was a light rail network that they were planning to run on 15-minute headways. All right, if you run a light rail network on 15-minute headways, you have a train car that carries 300 people 4 times an hour. Right, you can carry that many people with buses running 8 times an hour. Okay, and if you do that, you don't have to build guideways, right? And you don't have to buy the expensive train cars. And so if the mayor of Memphis, and I don't think he or she did this, had abandoned their light rail plan and put buses in place, they could have provided better service, shorter headways, right, for a fraction of the capital costs, right, which would have meant that the city did not have to pay those bonds back forever, right? So my advice would be buy things that people want to use, that they will use at capacity, and that they can afford.
Okay. Thank you. So that's I think that's a good starting point. I have a few follow-up questions on that. One is, I mean, obviously we often think of this question, we frame it in terms of direct versus indirect benefits. So what you just said, in a sense, speaks to the direct benefits or the willingness to pay or use the services. So what's your view on the evidence on the broader indirect benefits?
So let me follow up on that example. So if the Nashville light rail line is going to cost $10 a rider to operate, and people are willing to pay $4 a ride to get on it, then you have a $6 per rider deficit to make up. So the indirect benefits have to be $6 per rider. So if you want this thing to balance out on a cost benefit test, you have to somewhere find $6 of indirect benefits for every rider, right? So then the question is there some way that we can do that? Does the evidence suggest that? So let me tell you what, there is a large empirical literature which does versions of the experiment. Let's drop some transportation infrastructure in a city and see what happens later, right? And so, I will tell you sort of my take on what that literature says, all right, is that it is very easy to find evidence that when you put transportation infrastructure in a city, the city spreads out. All right, so the United States underwent an enormous suburbanization during the period from 1950 to 1990. you can account statistically for almost that whole decentralization with the interstate highway system. Okay, you do the same thing in China, you do the same thing in Europe. All right, that study's been replicated. So it has this enormous impact on where people locate. Okay, if you want to know if it changes the number of people or the amount of economic activity in a city, that evidence is much harder. And I think and casual empiricism, I think, will lead you to the wrong place here, because it's so easy to find evidence of people being moved around or displaced. You say it's natural to think this road brought people here. And the answer is it did bring people here, but it brought them from somewhere else. All right. So what the evidence says, it is very hard to find that if we look at what happens to cities, if we take a set of cities and we compare those that got more transportation infrastructure, those that don't, okay, the growth rate in population is almost identical. All right. So if you think that adding infrastructure to a city is having dramatic impacts on productivity, that should show up in wages and that should show up in population. Okay. And you just do not see that in the data. All right. That's true for roads. It's true for subways. It's not completely sure that it's not completely clear that it's true for BRTs. Okay. So the indirect benefits, if you think that spreading people out so they can live in lower density, have more land, bigger houses, not live in really compact slums, that's a big win. All right. Like if you've ever seen a shanty town, getting people so that they can live on a little bit more land is a big win. But the effects on aggregate productivity look small. It looks like roads move productivity around more than they create it. Right.
Okay, so let me again follow up on that, and just two things. One is on one specific type of investment, and then I'll maybe we'll end up talking a bit more about developing countries in Africa versus East Asia. You've written the paper on subways. So for those who don't know, he has a paper called "Subway on Earth," if I'm correct.
Yes.
Yeah, where they actually reviewed. So can you tell us a little bit what's the evidence on the impact of subways generally?
So we have a census of all the subway systems in the world. So my co-author Marco Gonzalez is a genius at managing undergraduates and has constructed a census of all the subway networks in the world. Right. So we were able to match those systems to cities, and so we can see how cities change after you build subways. Right. And the three things that we found are that subways decentralize cities, just as you would expect, just as for roads. That when you look at the growth rate of population or of lights at night around the time of a subway opening, you can see no change in either the level or trend. All right. And if you look in particularly dirty cities, you can find a decrease in the levels of particulate pollution. So it looks as if, to some extent, subways are diverting people from travel that burns fossil fuels, and that in some cities that's having a measurable effect on pollution, and that effect will probably not get you your $6 a rider that you need to make that Nashville streetcar make sense, but it might get you $2. Okay.
Okay, so now I'm going to be a little bit of devil's advocate here and push back on some of the things you say, or try at least, and thinking of the context, and I come back to this example of East Asian cities that, some cities like Singapore a few decades ago decided to build subways against the advice of the bank. I understand who was saying, "Oh, you should do a BRT. You're just not big enough." And apparently they don't regret that. So now we're in the situation where there's this big urbanization drive in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, and we expect 750 million people to move to cities, and cities to expand dramatically, actually, in space and in population. So is there a case for over-investing maybe early on in transport in this? I mean, given the type of heuristic you've been giving us, is there a case for building a subway now rather than just running buses or BRTs, even though maybe the direct and indirect benefits are not enough now, but it might be when the city reaches 20 million people in 20 years, right? Oh, it's a difficult question. I
So,
understand.
so I think that, so let's be upfront about this. Singapore was run by the most successful real estate developer that we've seen in this century. All right. And so holding the planners for Singapore up for a model is certainly admirable, but probably not attainable. All right. And just as you can find examples where people built subways in advance of demand, and it was a success, I'm sure we can also find examples where people built subways in advance of demand and it was not. So the Shepherd Line extension in Toronto, for example, right? So like if I was investing billions of dollars, I would not want to do it on the basis of cherry-picked examples, right? I would want to do it on the basis of the whole, I would want to do it on the basis of the whole population. And if you happen to be the best real estate developer that the world has seen in the 21st century, then like I will defer to your judgment. But otherwise, I would like to go with population averages. And the population averages are that when people build cities get subways, it does not make an effect that is big enough to see that in the aggregates, to see in the aggregates when you can see it spreading things out. So it's not that there's no signal, it's that the signal is on how the city is organized in space, not on how big it is.
Okay, I mean, thank you very much, Matt. I think we got quite a few things to think about, and
So can I have one more minute?
of course.
So I don't want to be quite as pessimistic as all that. One of the other things that you see very clearly in the data is that when cities get more transportation infrastructure, they change in ways that are consistent with becoming more open to trade. Right. So when you see more transportation infrastructure connecting rural villages to the rest of the world, you see a lower fraction of the population employed in subsistence agriculture and a higher fraction employed in cash crops. And you see similar sort of qualitative changes in bigger cities as well, like places get more oriented towards trade. That should be a benefit, but it's not something that shows up in the aggregates that we've been able to see. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Yep. So I will invite Rafael Pereira. Rafael is a senior researcher at IPA in Brazil. He has a PhD in economics from Oxford, and his research focuses on urban and transportation policy to shape cities.
Is this working?
No.
Where do I put it on? Okay, is it working now? Okay, thank you. Fantastic. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here. My name is Rafa Pereira, and I'm a researcher in the Brazilian federal government at the Institute for Applied Economic Research. What gives me great pleasure indeed to be here is that the fact that we are all here talking about the accessibility benefits of transportation policies and investments means that we are making small progress. Just 5 or maybe 10 years ago, we would be talking about travel time savings and how we should be here trying to tackle congestion. So just the fact that we have this room filled with people talking about accessibility benefits just give me a lot of joy. And today I'll be very briefly talking about what is accessibility. Most of you already know this. I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Why it matters for the thrive of cities and agglomeration economies. What is the impact of accessibility on employment outcomes? And I'll just close with a few very quick challenges. What is accessibility, or what I usually like to call it spatial access to opportunities, which I think it's more clear. It gets the message across more clearly. So this is just a quick example. There's a person in the city of Porto Alegre in Brazil, but this could be in Washington, D.C., Tokyo, Nairobi, or Paris, right? So this person, if she takes public transit, in any city, there are multiple opportunities, public services, jobs, schools, and here we have restaurants or food banks, if you will. But if that person can only take public transit, she can only reach that area highlighted in yellow in the polygon. So this is the area that is actually accessible that person can reach. This tells us immediately what of all of those restaurants and opportunities that exist in the city, the opportunities she's actually able to reach, access, and engage with, and all the other opportunities is immediately excluded from, right? Now, what I like to emphasize here is that whatever policy you can think of, there are only two different ways in which you can improve people's access to opportunities. In the first big group of policies, you can expand the person's area, right? So you can do this, for example, by increasing network connectivity. If you build a new BRT line, or if you build a new subway line, or you can just increase the frequency of your services. You will spend less time waiting at the bus stop, and you'll be able to travel further away. Or in the end, you're just increasing people's travel speed by tackling congestion. Whatever policy you choose to do that, what you're basically doing is you're expanding the area that is accessible to that person. Now, there is a very interesting second set of policy options that allow you to increase accessibility, which is basically about increasing proximity, which you can do, for example, by changing land use regulations that allow for higher population density in the CDB, or just increasing land use activities, mixed land use activities near where people already live. I guess you can kind of imagine which of those two different options, which one is usually more effective, greener, and cheaper. But we are here to talk about transportation and how transportation will actually affect people's access and ultimately lead them to better employment outcomes. And I think just to understand how accessibility is actually important to think about employment outcomes, we need to think about how accessibility or transportation systems fuel different mechanisms that allow us to think about the agglomeration economy of cities. Before we do that, I just wanted to highlight one quick example of what we actually mean by accessibility in a real case scenario. So this is the city of São Paulo, and in the Access to Opportunities Lab we have in Brazil, we've been mapping city block level access to employment, schools, and health services for all of the Brazilian largest cities by transportation mode. And this is just one example of how you can measure access to jobs by transit in the city of São Paulo, but we have seen many maps like this for many cities in the world. This is just one quick example. So the role of accessibility and transportation in cities and in the labor market really comes down to three different mechanisms that support economies of agglomeration that allow cities to and markets to function. The first of them is about matching between workers and firms. So higher job accessibility expands the effective labor market for both workers and for firms. If you live in areas with higher job access, you can have a greater set of opportunity options or job opportunities for you to reach and apply for. And if you're in a firm located in an area with higher accessibility, you have a larger pool of potential workers and candidates with diverse skills applying for your job. So ultimately, we are reducing the spatial friction between labor market matching between workers and firms. The second mechanism for agglomeration economies is about sharing. And we really mean here about sharing infrastructure, inputs, and intermediary services. And the idea here is that accessibility increases the scale of shared transport infrastructure, intermediary resources, inputs, and services, which makes cities more efficient in many different ways. I could go on and on, giving you all of many different examples here, but I only have 10 minutes, so that's why I'm spitting up as I speak. And the final third mechanism that supports agglomeration of economies in cities is fundamentally about learning or knowledge spillovers. And here is just to recognize that many different studies have been showing how areas with greater accessibility allows us to have easier face-to-face interactions and mobility between firms, which ultimately allows for denser professional and social networks with more frequent and diverse interactions that lead to more innovation and collaboration. So this is all theoretical, right? So we have seen many different studies have been demonstrated this empirically, but what I have presented so far is basically about theories and concepts. What I would like to draw your attention to now is the evidence that we have about how confident we are that improving people's access ultimately affect their employment outcomes. And there are many different studies that have been developed over the past few years. They're very difficult and to implement in real case studies because of how the data is usually limited, and we don't have proper causal identification in most of the studies. So I'll just draw your attention to 3 different studies. We have very clean causal identification strategies that allow us to put our finger on the evidence and say that this is the actual impact of accessibility on employment. So the first one, and these are all studies that have been very careful in trying to find exogenous shocks in people's accessibility and try to find their employment outcomes. In one study in Sweden, in the placement of refugees across different cities, authors have found that refugees that were assigned to locations with higher employment accessibility had a 3 percentage point higher probability of being unemployed instead of compared to their counterfactual counterparts. Another study in the United States that found that across the labor market for a few years, when you have a firm that closes down and it goes through a mass layoff, workers that live in areas with higher employment density and employment accessibility and public transit accessibility actually spent less time unemployed, so they bounced back faster into the labor market. And finally, a study that looked at the environmental disruptions of the New York subway because of Katrina. I think it was Katrina, or it was another hurricane? Sandy, I think, yeah. Actually found that the closure of the subway route increased unemployment by 1.4% for the average population that was affected by the subway. And this effect was even higher for people living in car-dependent and without vehicles in the household, and even larger for Blacks and Hispanics communities. The key takeaway message of all of these results and different papers here is really that the gains of accessibility are disproportionately larger for transit-dependent, minority, and low-income groups. I'll just close my presentation very briefly. I don't know how many more minutes do I have, but yeah, I have 2 minutes, maybe. Just 3 key challenges that I think I would like you to keep in mind while we have the conversation in the next panel. The first one is that we have very few studies in the global south. Most of these studies look at global north countries, and I just brought here 2 examples which are exceptions to the challenge here. The first one is a study by Ana Maria Moreno Monroy and colleagues who looked at the expansion of the BRT and rail services in São Paulo and how it affected employment, and particularly informal employment in the city. They found that 5 to 7% reduction in local informality along the BRT corridors, the new BRT and rail corridors. In Bogota, there was a fascinating work by Nick Tzvanidis where they found that a 10% increase in the commuter market yields a 40 to 50% rise in commuting along major transportation corridors. But most importantly, it increased employment density by 1.6% and formal establishment counts by 1.3 to 1.8%. Now, a lot of the challenges here are related to what Professor Turner mentioned before, that some of these changes here, most of the time, we cannot know to what extent these increases in employment happen as a result of the increasing accessibility, meaning are there new firms that are popping up, or this is just the spatial sorting or reallocation of firms that already exist, which is, in this particular case, this is what explains most of the results, at least for the case of Bogota. Finally, 2 more interesting challenges here. One of them is that we've been seeing more and more robust analysis engaging with better and more carefully calculated accessibility metrics, so we have better understanding of computational tools and data to calculate spatial access to opportunities. However, we still have very little studies that actually engage with dynamic effects using spatial economic models, and also that accounts for transportation monetary costs. Most of the studies that we have been seeing in the literature look at transport accessibility, simply looking at the travel time to get to jobs, but monetary cost is a fundamental barrier, especially in low-income countries and especially in Latin America. And finally, one of the reasons why we have very few studies in the global south is that it's very difficult to have the proper data that allows you to have correct causal identification to isolate the causal effect of transport investments. This is basically to say that there is a classic chicken and egg problem. When you build a BRT or a subway line throughout given neighborhoods or in the city, you see employment going up. Is this employment going up as a result of the BRT or the subway that you have already built, or the location that was selected to receive that BRT and the subway, that location was selected precisely because there was already a high or an increasing demand in that area. So there's always this endogenous problem of what came before, the chicken and egg. There are a few studies that have actually shown that once you account for this endogenous into the selection of where the projects are built, there are no gentrification effects in many transportation corridors that people initially thought there were causing gentrification. So as I said, this also relates to how can we infer from the data to what extent the increasing of job accessibility or the economic growth or the increasing the number of jobs in firms happen because of this net job creation or just simple spatial sorting or spatial reallocation. That's all I had for today. I think there are many more studies that I would love to talk to you here, but we only have very few minutes. And I think we'll have probably the most interesting conversation now with colleagues sharing their experience in Latin America. Cheers.
Thank you, Rafael. Nicolas Supignan, the floor is yours.
Angel, thank you very much, and thank you for all the people that are joining us today. Rafa has done a lot of research on these topics, and this session actually was thought something like 4 or 6 months ago. We were discussing with Nicolas Peltier how we could foster better transportation projects that could allow us to find evidence and to prove that better transportation means better cities with better jobs. But then speaking and talking with Nicolas, we wanted to take this conversation one step further. And we thought about what if we could not only talk about jobs, but about the quality of the jobs. And I think that it's an even more interesting question. Rafa, you said you were very excited about having all these people here talking about access to opportunities in the cities. I think we are even more excited to be talking about what if, and I think it's a major question. What if transportation can not only allow us to access to more jobs, but to better jobs? In South America, Latin America, and the Caribbean, our economies are 50% informal, 50%. So what if by building better transportation systems, we can improve the quality of the jobs? Not only that map that you show us, Rafa, that we can increase the actual opportunities, but what if those opportunities are better opportunities? Then we can have better impacts on fiscal policy, and then we can have better impacts on other kinds of the opportunities that overall we have as cities. So to deepen on this research, we are working with Rafa and with Daniel Rodriguez from Berkeley to understand a little bit better what happens in Latin America and the Caribbean on that question. What if better transportation systems could foster different kind of jobs? And we have this panel. We're going to be speaking with Tania Bertoldi. Tania is the Minister of Infrastructure of Neuquén in Argentina. We have Juan Carlos Parra. He's the General Manager of the Metro of Quito. And we have Mafe Ortiz. She's the General Manager for Transmilenio. And we have Manuela Francisco. She's the Global Director for Fiscal Policy and Growth here at the World Bank. So thank you very much for joining us today in this conversation. And we're going to switch a little bit. Tania, we're going to start with Manuela because Manuela has to leave the room in a couple of minutes. So we're going to switch orders. Manuela, this side of the table loves to spend money. We need to spend money. We need to put more transportation projects in the provinces, in the cities, and you are the gatekeeper of fiscal policy. So how can we convince you or the Ministries of Finance and Economics that investing in transportation is actually better for fiscal policy? Because if our thesis is correct, that we're going to improve the quality of the jobs, perhaps we may be increasing tax revenues, formal economies, and overall fiscal policy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. It's really a pleasure, and I really enjoyed hearing the previous speakers. So at the World Bank, I covered jobs, fiscal, and debt. Other things too, but I think those are the important ones here today. So as you know, the World Bank is very much focused on the jobs agenda, and we talk often about the job challenge. I don't know if you've seen the numbers that we have put forward. We have been doing some analysis, and our estimations point to about 1.2 billion young people joining the workforce meaning the working age, which starts at 15 years old, in the next 10 years. We know by the studies that we've done that more will be in school. So we think maybe about 480 million might be in school, 420 might have jobs, but will be low quality jobs, and 300 million may not have job at all. So it's very, very important. Infrastructure, and this is very pertinent because infrastructure is key. So what we are discussing at the bank is that we need an ecosystem to deliver jobs. So infrastructure alone does not create jobs other than the direct jobs, but we want to go beyond that. But we need a number of conditions to meet that. Infrastructure is key, and I agree with you. They will create stronger economies. They will be able to tax more because it's going to open markets, going to connect employers with employees, is going to connect rural producers with urban consumers. And let me talk a bit about the indicator, because you talked about quality. So at the World Bank, the way we are doing the indicator is somewhat a bit different than when you're talking about, because for us, we have to have a World Bank group indicator, meaning that we need to capture lending is to support policies. We need to capture lending that is investment project financing. We need to capture guarantees or equity investments. And we need to bring everything under one indicator. So we count all kind of work, meaning self-employed, formal and informal. And we are interested in the change in labor income. So for us, quality, and we talk about quality, we use labor income as a proxy for quality. We are working with ILO to look into additional measures of quality, but for the jobs indicator look into people that didn't have jobs, that get a job, so extensive margin, but also the ones that already have a job that get a better job, so higher income. So we bring all this and translate all this into labor income, change in labor income, divided by the average wage of the beneficiaries of the project, and that gives us an equivalent number of jobs, just roughly speaking. And we can, of course, talk much more about this. In terms of fiscal, I think you talked about something that is critical, that we talked about all these investment projects, but we need to have the finance. One thing more about jobs that I want to say, because I think this is important. In the past, you used to think about jobs in the sense of direct jobs, counting number of people that got a job. This is very important for infrastructure. When we do an infrastructure project, when we build the road, when we think about jobs, it's not the workers, the construction workers that we are interested in. Of course, they matter, but many times these are even temporary jobs. What we are thinking is about those direct jobs, but also all the jobs that are created because there is an acceleration in economic activity because of that project, and also all the jobs that can be created because there is more trade. For example, imagine a road that connects two cities. You have the direct workers that are recruited to build the road. You have all the economic activity that is generated through backward linkage, but As you connect to cities, you will have a cruising trade, for example, which also deliver jobs. So we count all these count of jobs. And we can even have more. Imagine, for example, Padma Bridge in Bangladesh that basically connected the country. You can even think about general equilibrium effects because it's going to have a countrywide impact. So when we think about jobs, we go much further than direct jobs. And this is very important for infrastructure because we believe infrastructure is actually critical and can have economy-wide effects. Now, coming to how to finance this. So the challenge is where we have poor infrastructure is where we don't have resources. So low-income countries face a significant challenge. Currently, right now, about half of the low-income countries are either in debt distress or at high risk of debt distress. In terms of debt service, what we've seen, the debt service payments are triple than they were last decade. The debt service payments in low-income countries, taking together the all low-income countries as a percentage of the combined GDP of the low-income countries is 8%. 8%. For many countries, 8% in debt service is more than they spend on education, health, and infrastructure. Yeah, so there's where the money is going. Because of past policies, of course, but that's the point, that's where we are now. In terms of revenue mobilization, exactly because these economies are not as strong as they could be, hence the importance of infrastructure, 2/3 of low-income countries collect then 15% of GDP in tax revenues. 15% is what is considered to be the minimum for a country to function, to deliver education, health, and infrastructure. They collect much less than that. Some countries collect 6 to 7%. So there are no resources. Now, the private sector. The private sector, they want to make profits. We understand that. And many times, invest in these countries, the balance between risk and return is not where one would expect to be. There are not a secure stream of revenues. These contracts, will the government honor these contracts going forward? There are lots of questions about that. So what to do? There are lots of challenges with PPPs. Some cases, they have worked out well. In my own country, I'm from Portugal, they didn't do so well, as you know, with the global financial crisis, when there were expectation of certain levels of traffic and it materialized. Suddenly, all these liabilities materialized and Portugal found itself in a very difficult position and they had to renegotiate all these PPPs. So it's not easy and it's really, a cycle. You don't have resources to invest in infrastructure. You don't have infrastructure to bring investors and to basically create jobs. So you need to cut the cycle. So I will stop here, but I'm just going to say a few things. There is a lot of discussion today about tax incentives, as you probably know. The bank, we are not so keen on those because there are lots of foregone revenues. But there are some cases where investors are expected to build infrastructure and construct infrastructure. That is something that can be users' fees, because ultimately, many times these investments are very regressive. So you build a big road in the urban area, you benefit the better off in the society, not the poor in the rural households. So we need to find ways so that the country can really commit to this investment in infrastructure so that this infrastructure will generate jobs and growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. So you spoke about many different things. You spoke about metrics, and we're going to come back to what kind of metrics we could use to actually understand better how we can allocate our resources. But I'm going to stay with your last point on how we can focalize these projects just to make sure that we target actually the people that we want to benefit the most, right? And I think that is one of the most complex questions that we have when we try to spend money. Spend money is easy, spend money well spent it. It's not that easy. Tania, from your experience, Neuquén is one of the largest provinces in Argentina, very rich in oil and gas, and is experiencing an economic boom that has also brought a lot of tourism industries. So, in your experience, could you please tell us a little bit more about these connections between providing better infrastructure and how that is impacting job creation? Tania is going to be speaking in Spanish. For those of you who want, you can download the app, the TT app, and you can go to the session and you can actually have some online translation. And if not, Cata is going to help us with some translation. Tania, gracias.
Bueno, primero muchas gracias a todos y a todas. Muy buenas tardes. Gracias al Banco Mundial, a la CAF, por la invitación y por generar estos espacios y momentos de debate, de interacción con distintos sectores y puntos del mundo. También particularmente por compartir este panel con distintos países latinoamericanos que, aunque estamos dentro de este polígono latinoamericano, tenemos realidades y puntos de partida para planificar el transporte y la conectividad de manera muy distinta. Particularmente hoy estoy aquí, como me presentaron recién, como ministra de Infraestructura de la provincia de Neuquén. Neuquén está situado al norte de la Patagonia es el sur de la Argentina, ahí es donde nos desarrollamos, es una provincia de aproximadamente 100.000 kilómetros cuadrados, pero con una muy baja densidad demográfica, somos 700.000 habitantes, somos una provincia del interior de la Argentina. En ese contexto es en el que estamos trabajando y con una economía productiva dual, por un lado energía intensiva en capital y por el otro lado regiones turísticas, económicas, intensivas en empleo, aunque dispersas en el territorio. En ese contexto, la distancia no es una condición geográfica, es una restricción económica estructural. Neuquén, como recién decía Nicolás, alberga Vaca Muerta, que es el segundo yacimiento de gas no convencional del mundo, pero por otro lado el turismo es nuestro segundo motor de empleo formal. Esa combinación de energía concentrada y empleo disperso convierte a la conectividad en una variable sistémica. Entre el año 2014 y 2024, nuestro valor agregado provincial creció 93,3%, mientras el promedio nacional fue prácticamente nulo. El sector hidrocarburífero creció en esa misma década, entre el 14 y el 24, 196%, lo que hoy representa el 57% del valor agregado provincial. Por lo tanto, ese dinamismo generó migración interna acelerada. La población neuquina creció en esos 10 años más del 35%, que cuatriplica el crecimiento de la media nacional en la Argentina. Ese crecimiento fue real, pero cuando ese crecimiento se concentra sectorialmente, la integración territorial no ocurre de manera automática. En territorios extensos, como en nuestra provincia y en general en la Patagonia, la infraestructura es una condición que permite que ese crecimiento se distribuya de manera equitativa en el territorio. Cuando asumió esta gestión de gobierno, asumimos la gestión en diciembre del año 2023, voy a darle algunos datos para entender en qué contexto, un pequeño diagnóstico de en qué situación estaba nuestra provincia. Tenía tan solo 1.200 kilómetros de rutas provinciales asfaltadas. A eso se le sumaba un déficit de infraestructura de más de 4.000 millones de dólares. Déficit de infraestructura, me refiero a edificios educativos, salud, seguridad, redes de agua, plantas de tratamiento de líquidos cloacales, infraestructura que permiten la sustentabilidad social del crecimiento para cualquier estado. En provincias con estas características, la desigualdad se expresa en accesibilidad. Desde la economía espacial sabemos que cuando la fricción territorial es alta, el mercado efectivo se reduce, y cuando el mercado se reduce, también lo hace la eficiencia en el emparejamiento laboral. Por lo tanto, el match laboral no se da cuando tenemos una fricción territorial alta como la que estoy describiendo. La discontinuidad territorial implica fragmentación laboral, radios de búsqueda más cortos, menor información, menos formalización. Por eso, para nosotros, desde Neuquén y cuando asumimos nuestra gestión de gobierno, no teníamos un problema de movilidad, sino de sistema. Teníamos que reparar la estructura de la red vial, de infraestructura y del sistema que genera a partir de ahí tener la posibilidad, como quizás mis compañeros lo van a poder expresar, de pensar en sistemas de movilidad colectiva para optimizar el tiempo y el recurso. Nosotros antes estábamos un paso más atrás de esa situación que teníamos que resolver y que teníamos que atender. Les comparto una frase de un arquitecto catalán, Martí Arís, que posiblemente muchos de ustedes conozcan. Él decía que no es la pieza aislada lo que organiza, sino es la relación entre las partes. Y llevado ese simple concepto a la aplicación de las políticas públicas, una ruta para nosotros no es un tramo, sino que pasa a ser un vector relacional. Con esa lógica es que diseñamos nuestro plan vial, que entre el 2024 y el 2028 vamos a estar interviniendo en más de 1.161 kilómetros, 787 kilómetros nuevos de carreteras asfaltadas, más 374 de mejoras de aquella red existente. Por lo tanto, en 4 años vamos a estar construyendo prácticamente el mismo volumen de infraestructura y de red vial que se construyó en toda la historia institucional de la provincia de Neuquén. Pero para nosotros la magnitud física no es lo central. Estamos modificando la geometría económica del territorio. Consolidamos, a partir de ahí tomamos algunas decisiones. Una fue la consolidación de un eje norte-sur que une en casi 650 kilómetros toda la provincia. Casualmente el acceso al norte lo estamos financiando con un préstamo de Banco Mundial y el acceso al sur con un préstamo de CAF, pero hasta el 2023 ese eje no estaba considerado como eje, eran simplemente segmentos de carreteras pavimentadas de manera aislada. Lo que estamos proponiendo en este plan de desarrollo vial es la integración y consolidar este sistema. Por eso este eje va a ser uno de los ejes centrales que va a unir 22 localidades y 17 lagos, reservas de agua natural con mucho potencial turístico. Además, estamos consolidando los ejes transversales. Una característica geográfica de nuestra provincia es que en todo el eje oeste limitamos con el país vecino de Chile, con lo cual la conexión transnacional es clave y estratégica para potenciar y desarrollar nuestro mercado, además de consolidar ejes productivos vinculados a los hidrocarburos y a la región de Vaca Muerta y corredores turísticos. Cuando la accesibilidad mejora, el mercado laboral efectivo se amplía, trabajadores acceden a más empleadores, empresas acceden a mayor oferta laboral y proveedores se integran a a cadenas de valores mucho más extensas, generando economías de red. Y para finalizar este plan de infraestructura que es histórico para la República Argentina y en especial para nuestra provincia, porque se está intentando hacer la mayor cantidad de obra pública y particularmente de redes viales para generar estos sistemas y dinamizar nuestras economías y nuestro mercado. Lo sostenemos gracias al acompañamiento de los préstamos internacionales que no solo financian y aportan el financiamiento, sino que también nos acompañan con los estándares técnicos, con la disciplina ambiental y con el fortalecimiento institucional que en provincias y en contextos periféricos como Neuquén, como Argentina, es muy importante el fortalecimiento institucional, tan importante como el desarrollo de la obra. Y para finalizar, para nosotros no estamos acumulando kilómetros, sino que estamos desarrollando la integración sistémica que necesita nuestra provincia y nuestro país. Gracias.
Tanya, thank you very much. And I think it's very interesting to have a different perspective, not from a city, but from a province that is growing very, very fast. The numbers that you presented are amazing. Thank you very much for that experience. And I think we didn't know that tourism was gaining such power and such a track in Neuquén and in Argentina in general. So thank you very much. Juan Carlos, from the Metro of Quito experience, we have had very, very interesting conversations on how you rediscovered new jobs and you were able to change the way Quito was understanding how to capture those jobs. So I think it would be very interesting with our panel and with our audience if you can share that experience, because I think is vital for understanding this conversation. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation, CAF and for Bank. And I think the key word is it's time. Before Metro, for example, a user that goes from south to north took between 1 hour and a half and 2 hours to mobilize. Now with Metro, the distance between the 22 kilometers of the line is 35 minutes. And this is because of the shape of the city in the central area. It's no more than 4 kilometers with the width of the city. This is the first urban rail system in Ecuador. As I said, it runs 22 kilometers and has 15 stations, one line, and it connects the north to with the south of the city. This is one line, north-south, 15 stations and 22 kilometers. It begins operations on December 1st of 2023 and already carried around 130 million passenger trips. And nowadays, in a short time, Metro de Quito has become the backbone of Quito public transportation system. About your question, this system is also integrated from north to south with the municipal bus networks, such as Trolebus and Ecovía. It allows the people to travel more easily across the metropolitan areas. On the other hand, this connection with the main employment areas is related with the same line, and it took, as I said, 35 minutes, improving the mobility act and the access to the jobs of thousands of the users, of the residents of Quito. On the other hand, and at the beginning, these challenges related with the ramp-up challenges were these ones. The first one, the coordination between multiple public and private institutions. For example, security is one of the values that Metro has. So you can travel safely in our system. On the other hand, is the adaptation that the users need to in order to live the experience with this system, because we are already the people use the money, the coins in order to buy the ticket. And at the beginning, we began with a relation 30% 30%, 70%, being 17% the amount of the percentage of people that use coins, use money, and 30% the people that use the card. We use, for example, in this case, a kind of debit card. You use in this case also the ID card, and we use the QR that you have in your cell phone, the QR code, as a ways of payment. And then, well, nowadays this percentage change to 45% of use of coins, and on the 55% and the use of digital and other media payments. And the other challenge is related with the building of technical and operational capacity in a country without previous railway experience. In that way, Metro keep direct and indirect jobs related with these value chains, backward and forward, related in the backward stage with all of the employment due by the operation and maintenance of Metro with Ecuadorian and local people. And on the other hand, in this chain, sorry, we have all of the production and tourism jobs or new jobs created according to the lines or to the stations, and with a radio, with an estimated radio of half a kilometer. And these in this case, they are another indirect jobs that Metro not Metro, but it's created by the operation of Metro de Quito.
Juan Carlos, thank you very much. Congratulations with all the achievements. Metro of Quito started operations a couple of years ago and has been really successful. Maria Fernanda, Mafe, we saw each other last week. Transmilenio was having its 25th anniversary. We are all very excited. Congratulations for 25 years of reshaping a different city in Bogota. Mafe, so Transmilenio has been serving the city as a way to redistribute opportunities and wealth and create a more just city. From your perspective, how do you think Transmilenio has helped in improving and fostering better access to this kind of opportunities, and especially to jobs, as we have been discussing?
Thank you, Nico. And thanks for the invitation to having this conversation here, because I think that transportation or public transport systems have a very strong relationship with powering jobs and growth, economic growth of the cities. So I'm going to start from the context of the city. Bogota is a city of 8 million people. Transmilenio is the main public transport system, or the unique, because we are the integrated public transport system of the city with more than 4 million trips per day. We have 10,500 buses running to service these trips every day. And for that, we have 35,000 people working every day in the system for giving that service. In that sense, we have a cost that is really high. Our annual cost is $19 billion, and we pay that cost. 50% of that cost we pay with the revenue fares, but the other part, we have to put the money from the local government mainly. So that's a big effort. But why is that? Because we are sure that this is a essential service for giving accessibility to 100% of the opportunities that the city is giving to the people. So it's not like a desire. We have to have the public transport system to give the access to the people. But in the topic of this panel, we have two perspectives. The first one is the accessibility that we offer to the people, but the other one is the jobs that we have created in the history of Transmilenio. So if we compare Transmilenio today with other big companies in the country, we are close to the biggest one, because in terms of workforce, so the 35,000 jobs that we have every day is the same that Bancolombia has, and Bancolombia is the biggest company in Colombia. So in that sense, and I'm gonna focus on that part because accessibility is like evident if we hear the participation of my colleagues here, but the other part is not so obvious. And the formalization of our system, the full coverage that we have today and the total integration of the system into a formal system is what allows us today to have that 35,000 jobs in the system. Before Transmilenio, maybe we're nothing, like, because we have better jobs, because we have formal jobs and permanent jobs. That's the other part. It's not just for the construction part, but for the operation that we have. And in addition, every time that we decide to, for example, include extra fleet into our system, we generate additional jobs for that part of the value chain. So today, for example, we are building almost 700 new buses, new electric buses for our system, and that is producing about 2,000 additional jobs in the country. So we are really, our relationship with the economic growth is very, very strong. And I want to add to the accessibility that my colleagues were mentioning, that accessibility is not just coverage that we have today, full coverage of the city, but it's also fair, and it is also, even the bus layout give accessibility, because we have different kind of users. So we have to think of the service considering the different kind of users that we have, in terms of fair and also in terms of the design of the infrastructure and the design of the bus. So today we are giving like free passes to some kinds of population to give more accessibility to the city. I have one example that for me was really important, that is the big teams that are coming every day to the city because they said, I don't have resources to go out and get a job. It's not like connecting the people to different jobs, but just to find the first job in the city. So for them, it was essential that we can give them free passes to the public transport system in order to access in a first part of, in a first term to the city. So that's a really good example. And today we are, as Claudia was mentioning before, we are giving free passes to different populations that are in vulnerable conditions. So they have a number of free passes per month. And we have seen that people is traveling more in the city, 40% more today than before of this action or this practice that we implemented in 2025. And in the new buses, we are including in the new bus layout some different like solutions for people that are having like caring trips, for strollers, and so and also for people with disabilities, and that's another way of giving access to the people. So in that sense, transportation really matters in terms of economic growth and jobs.
Mafe, thank you very much. You've touched on our point that I think it's really key, and Manuela also mentioned it, and that's a perfect connector with the next question, and it's about metrics. We oftentimes say that what we can't measure, it doesn't exist. But then again, if we think about what you said, people that do not travel, we don't see them because exactly they don't travel because they cannot afford traveling. So we need to be very careful of not leaving those people behind because we cannot measure them because they're not using the system and because we're not seeing them. So one concrete question, because we're running out of time. Juan Carlos, one metric, and this is the same question for you three guys. If we could use one metric to understand better how our transportation projects could improve jobs, what would it be?
In our case, this metric is related with the fare. It's affordable for the users. In our case, the cost of the ticket is from 45 cents. The real cost, if you can put the whole operation and maintenance cost, could be reach $1.95. So we are working on a in a financial subsidy that is we are working on. In that case, the system is because of that. You have more than 200,000 people on average in labor days, and 176,000 trips ever in average the day month. So I think this is a relationship with the price of the ticket, and on the other hand, how can I say that the distance that you save, the time that you save in order to mobilize from north to south, that is a critical situation that the city had before Metro.
Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. Mafe, one metric that we can use.
Nico, for the first perspective, I think that the better metric would be people who do travel in the city, as you mentioned. That's, for me, the perfect metric. And for the other part, that is the new jobs that we can create, is the new better jobs that we create with the operation of the project. That's it.
Perfect. Tania, una medida, un indicador para medir nuestras mejoras.
Creo que en la provincia de Neuquén se puede medir por ocupación del turismo. Como decía recién, la relación entre el desarrollo hidrocarburífero, pero también el turismo como segunda potencia en la provincia, segundo desarrollo productivo en la provincia de Neuquén. Y un dato particular es que el 85% de quienes visitan nuestra provincia lo hacen sobre vías terrestres, con lo cual la red vial y la planificación que estamos llevando adelante no solo acompaña al turismo, sino que sostiene al turismo. Y un dato que puedo compartir y que es parte un poco de la pregunta es que en el 23 el número de ocupación en la temporada de verano, que va de diciembre, enero a febrero, en ese periodo la ocupación fue del 51,7%, frente a, después de haber ejecutado este plan vial y que estamos en ejecución aún, la última medición, que fue ahora que terminó en febrero de este año, es del 79,9%. Si bien la red vial no es un indicador directo del desarrollo del turismo, pero sí lo potencia, y creo que ese puede ser un buen dato para medir el impacto directo del plan vial que estamos llevando adelante.
Tania, thank you very much, and thank you very much all for joining us. Catalina Vanoli from CAF is going to share with us the closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your attention. Our session was intended to be dynamic and giving you a couple of interactions and conversations. So the conversation between Stefan and Professor Turner, a lecture from Rafael, and then a panel. It was intended for you to kind of grab this topic and this very interesting but complex topic that we need to understand more about to make our investments more equitable and egalitarian. So to sum up, we would like to give some three key points. First, as I said before, we need to understand better how to allocate our investments to access not only more jobs, but better jobs. So our understanding of this relationship, it's crucial, and we are doing some knowledge research, but also looking at practical case studies to understand this relationship. Metrics matter, as we were discussing earlier. We need to know how transport may increase jobs and where are the cases where jobs are not increased, so our money is not going to where we intend to. But we need to measure those effects, right? We are lacking that expertise right now. And also putting transport at the center of building more and more just and equitable cities and societies and territories. With this, we can affirm our commitment as a development bank and all the development banks to the UN Sustainable Transport Decade. I think it's a good space for MDBs to kind of commit and put the money where sustainable, just, and fair systems can improve lives. Thank you very much for your attention, and this is the end of the session. Thank you.